Let me ask a question. How many of you in the audience have used Uber or Lyft? Quite a few. Does anybody own a Tesla? Is John Maltby still here? There he is. Does anybody own a Tesla and has used its autopilot feature? One, two. John, you're not on the autopilot yet. Okay. In the years ahead, I know those numbers will increase as we get more comfortable and embrace alternatives to us driving solo. One of the ways we may get out of our congestion challenges is through the technology that Lauren Isaac writes about regularly and is here to share with us. Please welcome Manager of Sustainable Transportation at WSP Parsons Brinckerhoff, Lauren Isaac.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. This was really exciting to see my name with just blogger next to it because I actually do this professionally. So I work for WSP Parsons Brinckerhoff. If you're not familiar with it, it's a professional and engineering consulting services firm. I've spent most of my career doing consulting for transit agencies. I've worked in bike share. I'm now working in ride sharing. And what became really striking to me when I started reading about driverless vehicles, and this was probably about 2 or 3 years ago, was A, how quickly they're coming, B, how real the technology is, C, how much it was going to impact society. Over here. Okay. And yet the biggest thing is that at that time there was very little mention of government. And that has definitely changed in the last few years. But at that time, I thought it was really interesting since most of our clients are government agencies in transportation. So I applied for an internal research fellowship and I won it. And I spent about a year developing a guide for how local and state government agencies can plan for driverless vehicles. And as an aside, I developed the blog. And please feel free to follow it because I love blogging about this. But I do consult with agencies around the country and actually around the world on how they can plan for driverless vehicles. So to start, I like to just define what we're talking about. So driverless vehicles, also called automated or autonomous vehicles or self-driving vehicles, it's where a vehicle where the driver is intended to provide destination or navigation input, but they're not expected to be available for control at any time during the trip. This means that the driver can literally be sleeping. It really presents incredible opportunities in terms of changing the design of the vehicles, changing how we get around, how we use our vehicles, how we think of mobility. But thinking about it through the lens of government, it presents really incredible opportunities for safety. Right now, the estimates show that more than 90% of accidents that happen on our roadway are due to human error. So think distracted driving, drunk driving, speeding, that's over 90%. So in theory, if you are able to eliminate the driver, the human, from the equation, we would have the ability to bring accidents down by over 90%. So that's huge from what government goals perspectives are. The second piece is mobility. The ability to get elderly, disabled, and youth to be able to get around more easily is a great benefit. So then the question is, why aren't they here now? I mean, we in the Bay Area actually have had the benefit of seeing them. Have many of you seen them on the roads of the Bay Area? Yeah. I give this talk all over the place, and usually I'm explaining that they really are out there, and you have to believe me, they really are there. But you know, right now, most car companies, and technology developers are stating that these vehicles will be publicly available. Fully automated driverless vehicles will be publicly available in the 2018 to 2022 timeframe. The only exception I've heard of so far is Porsche, because Porsche drivers apparently want to have their vehicles. That's how Porsche feels about it. But that being said, it's very interesting to see forecasts of when we'll actually see a proliferation of the vehicles. I've seen some forecasts that say that we're going to have 100% driverless vehicle penetration in our society by 2026. 10 years. I think that's pretty aggressive and probably too aggressive, especially since the average age of our vehicles is 11 years. I don't think people are going to turn over that quickly. That being said, when you look at smartphone adoption, as we heard earlier, it's kind of incredible how quickly we adapt to technologies. So I would say that most forecasts I've seen estimate around 30 to 40% adoption in the 2030 timeframe, but it's yet to be seen. So why don't we have the vehicles here today? There are actually quite a few barriers to adoption right now. The one big one is obviously the technology, just the readiness of it. The question is how ready, how do we know when the technology is ready? And that's something that actually the government is struggling with, how to actually regulate that. The federal government just came out with draft policy guidelines about a month ago, and it was huge literally around the world in this industry because the US government really kind of came out ahead, and it included in it a 15-point safety checklist to outline what might stipulate when a driverless vehicle is ready. But another piece of this is human acceptance. Will people be willing to get into the vehicles? So I'll ask all of you, if you could get into a driverless vehicle right now, parked right outside a box, would you do it? Yeah, this is the Bay Area audience I know and love. I've given this talk in Connecticut. I had one person out of 200 raise their hand. Kind of amazing. But that is a huge issue, and I think literally if automakers had these cars available tomorrow, I don't think we would necessarily see great adoption. So right now the national average is well under 50% people willing to get into those vehicles. So there are quite a few other barriers. Examples include cybersecurity. Who's going to protect the data to make sure that terrorists don't hack into it? Who's going to protect the travel data, making sure there's data security and privacy protections? The liability question, who's liable if a driverless vehicle hits another driverless vehicle? What if that driverless vehicle hits a not driverless vehicle? It gets really complicated, and it's kind of throwing our insurance industry for a loop. And then the last piece is the government. I shouldn't say last, there are quite a few other barriers, those are the highlights, but the government, and what should the government be doing? So I want to really quickly walk through a couple of scenarios of what our world could look like with all driverless vehicles. So if you can kind of put your Jetsons thinking cap on, fast forward, say 50, 60 years, and imagine we have an entirely driverless society. So imagine I'm a mom, it's a Monday morning, I wake up, get my kids ready for school, and I summon our private driverless vehicle from its remote parking lot a few miles away. And that vehicle comes, it picks up the kids, and it takes them to school. And then by the time it gets back, I'm ready to go. So I get into the vehicle, and I first get on the elliptical trainer, and I get my workout in. And it's taking me to work while I'm doing this. And then I have some coffee, and I watch the news on my TV. And then I see I should probably get started on my workday, so I start working. And then eventually I do get into the office. So I'm probably sitting in traffic for most of that, but I don't really care. So then I get into the office and I realize I don't have any groceries for dinner that night. So I use my smartphone and I send the vehicle out to go get my groceries. So first I have the vehicle go to the one grocery store to get the cheapest meat. Then I have it go to another grocery store to get the cheapest vegetables. And then another grocery store to get the cheapest toilet paper. And then it knows it has no more errands, so it goes back out to the remote parking lot about 15 miles outside of the city, and it waits for its next assignment. So that's scenario one. I've given this talk quite a few times, and I've had quite a few people say to me, that sounds like a dream come true. It's what I've been waiting for. And it's actually what I call the nightmare scenario. It's actually very frightening if you think about with the way that we have congestion today. Imagine adding in that layer of trips and that many more trips. And now you're adding not just no mention of public transit in that scenario, not just single occupancy vehicle trips, but you have zero occupancy vehicle trips. It's a whole new world. So it's actually really frightening. So now I'm going to play out for you a totally different scenario. So imagine it's a Monday morning. I wake up, get my kids ready for school, and I get them onto their driverless school bus. And that driverless school bus takes them to school. And then when I'm ready to go, I use my smartphone and I summon a driverless shuttle. And that driverless shuttle shows up at my door, picks me up, picks up a couple of my neighbors, and then it takes us to the local train station. And then I get on the train, it's timed perfectly, so I get there and I get right on. I never take out my wallet, the whole thing is paid for seamlessly through my phone, and I get downtown. And then when I get downtown, I hop on a bike share bike and I go that last mile and I get into my office. So then when I'm in the office, I realize I don't have groceries for dinner that night. So I pull out my phone and I schedule a grocery delivery for that evening for when I'm home. So that second scenario, I call that the utopian scenario. These are obviously very extreme, but the real difference between those two scenarios is the level of vehicle and ride sharing that's happening. And I am the first to tell you, I know that our reality is going to be somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be that extreme. But, and that being said, I've had quite a few people say, I think the nightmare scenario is actually just an extension of today's use of vehicles. So that is something to think about. But I would purport to you that it's actually going to be the government that influences where on that spectrum that we fall. It's going to be good government policy and investment that's going to influence how we use vehicles. So think about level of ride sharing. I mean, having something like, how do we impact, the vehicle miles traveled impact, could be with things like road user charging or high occupancy vehicle lanes. We need people to actually feel the impacts when they make the decisions to use their vehicles that much. Another example will be putting in good policies and land use policies so that we reduce urban sprawl, so people don't choose to live farther from where they work, so they have really long commutes. Influencing how much we charge for parking and how much we charge sales tax for purchasing vehicles, so we reduce people's desire to own vehicles and to put more to park their vehicles downtown. So all of this said, it really shows the very, very important role of local and state governments, which I think is often overlooked in the media, but I think it's very important. So with that, I will turn it over for questions, and please feel free on the app. I know it has Twitter, LinkedIn, the blog, everything you could want to know about me in there. So thank you so much, and please ask any questions.